Welcome back to the channel. Today is a big day. Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, along with several others connected to the case, are in court for a scheduled settlement conference. The group includes the Wayfarer parties, Jamie Heath, Steve Sarowitz, Melissa Nathan, and Jen Abel. Everyone has gathered to see if this long-running dispute can be resolved without going to trial. Earlier this morning, Blake Lively arrived at court on her own. Notably, there was no Ryan Reynolds by her side. That caught many people off guard, especially since Ryan has publicly presented himself as a very supportive husband. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni arrived with his wife Emily. Jamie Heath showed up with his wife Natasha. Jen Abel was there, Steve Sarowitz was there, Melissa Nathan was there, and of course all of their attorneys were present as well. So, while many arrived with support systems, Blake appeared without a spouse accompanying her. This settlement conference wasn't a surprise. It was actually ordered late last year by Judge Lewis Lyman. The goal? To try and resolve the dispute before it ever reaches a trial. In most civil cases, a trial never happens. Judges often encourage or even require both sides to attempt a settlement first. And in this situation, the court, specifically the Southern District of New York, has been under heavy demand. This case has been using a lot of court resources, and the judge clearly hoped both sides might find a way to settle things privately and move forward. Now, if you're imagining Blake and Justin sitting across from each other in a tense conference room, staring one another down, that's not how this works. During a settlement conference like this, the two sides are kept in separate rooms. So, there's no dramatic face-to-face showdown happening across a table. If you've never experienced a legal settlement conference before, let me walk you through it in simple terms. Attendance is mandatory. Everyone involved has to show up in person, especially those with full authority to approve a settlement on the spot. Before today's meeting, all parties would have already met with the magistrate judge to discuss their goals, expectations, and the ground rules for negotiation. It's essentially a pre-meeting to make sure everyone understands the process and comes prepared. Each side brings their lead attorneys, and importantly, anyone with final settlement authority must be present. In many cases, that can include insurance companies or corporate representatives. But in this particular situation, the insurance carriers have reportedly declined coverage, so the negotiations are happening directly between Blake and the Wayfarer-related parties, without an insurer stepping in to handle costs or decisions. Before the conference, both sides typically submit confidential letters directly to the judge's chambers. These letters outline what each side wants and what they're willing to consider. They're not filed publicly. The opposing side doesn't see them, and the public definitely doesn't see them. Even if a settlement is eventually reached, the details often remain private. That privacy matters, especially in a case like this. The Wayfarer parties have been very clear about what they want. They've said they're seeking full exoneration. They want their names cleared. They want the truth as they see it to come out publicly. A confidential settlement might resolve the legal dispute, but it wouldn't necessarily give them that public vindication, unless part of the agreement includes some kind of public statement. As part of the process, Blake would have submitted a written settlement demand roughly 2 weeks before today's conference. Then the defendants would respond within about 7 days. From there, everything discussed becomes strictly confidential. Nothing said during settlement talks can be used later in court. That creates a space where both sides can speak openly, float ideas, and explore possibilities without worrying that their words will come back to haunt them at trial. Once everyone arrives at the courthouse and the settlement process begins, the magistrate judge steps in as a neutral facilitator. In this case, that role belongs to Sarah Netburn. Her job is to move back and forth between the two sides, carrying offers, counter-offers, and concerns, trying to find some middle ground where a resolution might finally be possible. Once everyone arrives, the process can begin in a few different ways. Sometimes both sides meet briefly in one room at the start. Other times, they're immediately placed into separate rooms, or even separate virtual breakout rooms. This phase is known as caucusing. Here's how it usually works. The judge already has Blake's settlement demands and the response from the Wayfarer side. From there, a magistrate goes back and forth between the two rooms. This is often called shuttle mediation. Think of it as quiet diplomacy. The judge carries offers, counteroffers, and feedback from one side to the other, trying to move everyone closer to common ground. During this shuttle process, the judge might talk privately with the defendants about the pros and cons of going to trial. They'll likely explain the benefits of settling now, instead of continuing a long and expensive legal battle. They may ask questions like, if we could get you most of what you want, would you consider resolving this today? On the other side, they'll ask Blake similar questions about flexibility and expectations. Now, if the two sides are very far apart, say one side refuses to pay anything and the other is seeking a large financial settlement, that can be a serious obstacle. But being in separate rooms actually helps. It allows everyone to speak openly with the judge, without worrying that their words will be used against them later. Each side can share their true bottom line, their concerns, and what they realistically hope to achieve. Anything said in these private conversations stays confidential. The judge won't repeat what you say to the other side unless you specifically give permission. That privacy is important because settlement conferences can be intense and high pressure. Keeping everyone separated reduces direct confrontation and helps prevent emotions from boiling over. It also allows the judge to gently reality check each side's position in private. Sometimes that's exactly what's needed to break a stalemate. Occasionally, if the judge believes it might help, both sides may be brought together for a joint discussion. But honestly, that doesn't always lead to productive results. Emotions can run high, and tensions can quickly rise. More often than not, the back-and-forth shuttle approach is more effective. If a deal is reached, the final step is formal. Everyone gathers, and the agreement is read into the record. That ensures all parties clearly understand and accept the terms before leaving the courthouse. Now, as for whether a settlement will actually happen here, there's reason to be skeptical. Right now, Judge Louis Lyman is still reviewing two major motions: a motion for summary judgment and a motion for judgment on the pleadings. Those are big. They can potentially reshape or even end large parts of the case before it ever reaches trial. When it comes to summary judgment, it's important to understand something. Not all evidence gets presented at that stage. Both sides submit key pieces of evidence to support their arguments, but they don't reveal everything. Witnesses aren't called to testify. Every document isn't introduced. Audio recordings, video clips, and additional supporting material may still be held back for trial. So while we've seen some of the evidence publicly, we definitely haven't seen all of it. And that matters. Sometimes the most impactful evidence only appears later, in court. For either side, that could strengthen or weaken their position dramatically. So far, though, based on what's publicly available, the evidence doesn't appear especially favorable for Blake Lively. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni and his team seem to be walking into the settlement conference from a relatively strong position. They have two potentially case-changing motions sitting in front of the judge. And there have already been signals from the court that certain arguments may not hold much weight. For example, there's been serious debate about whether creative direction on a film set or discussions about scene comfort levels can legally be framed as harassment. There are also questions about contractual issues, including whether certain agreements are even enforceable. And then there's the big question of Blake's role in the production itself. Documents submitted to the court, including a letter tied to the Producers Guild of America, suggest Blake described herself as deeply involved in nearly every aspect of the production. At one point, she even indicated she functioned as the HR department. That raises complicated legal questions about whether she can be considered an employee in the traditional sense, which could significantly impact how the case is viewed. All of this creates a complicated backdrop for today's settlement talks. Both sides know what's at stake, and they know the judge's upcoming rulings could change everything. According to statements already on record, Blake described herself as deeply involved in nearly every part of the production. She said she oversaw multiple areas, fired staff when necessary, and acted as a go-between for cast and crew on HR matters. She also claimed responsibility for safety, pre-production planning, and post-production work. At one point, she even described herself as working as a partner to the director. In fact, her letter connected to the Producers Guild of America reportedly states that she saw herself as a partner in the production, not simply an employee. And that distinction matters more than it might seem at first glance. If a settlement were reached right now, everything already filed publicly during the summary judgment phase could essentially fade into the background. The case would resolve without a judge making any final determination about who was right or wrong. In other words, there would be no clear ruling to settle the legal questions that have been raised. Summary judgment decisions don't always eliminate an entire case, but they often clarify key issues. Settling before those rulings come down means walking away without that clarity. I spoke with someone familiar with situations like this, and from their perspective, a settlement today seems unlikely. They believe the Wayfarer side wouldn't feel satisfied without full exoneration, something very specific. Not just a quiet resolution, but a clear outcome, showing they were not liable for sexual harassment, did not defame anyone, and did not orchestrate any smear campaign. In civil court, that kind of clean vindication is rare. But it's what they appear to want. From their point of view, they believe the evidence supports them, and that if this case goes to trial, even more information could come out in their favor. So, the incentive to settle may be low. They reportedly see the entire lawsuit as lacking a factual foundation, more of a public relations battle than a legal one. In their eyes, it's a narrative built in the media rather than in hard evidence. They also believe the initial complaint and related media coverage, including the involvement of the New York Times, were part of a broader strategy. From that perspective, they suspect there was never a true intention to push the case all the way through litigation. Instead, they think the expectation may have been that public pressure alone would be enough to overwhelm them. But when they pushed back legally, the situation changed. Here's where settlements get tricky. Even if both sides agree to resolve the case, neither side can force the other to publicly admit fault. A settlement usually comes with language stating there was no admission of wrongdoing by either party. One side can't force the other to apologize, retract statements, or declare themselves mistaken. It's typically a neutral resolution, sometimes with money exchanged, sometimes without, but without that public declaration of guilt or innocence. From the Wayfarer perspective, that kind of neutral ending may not be enough. They reportedly believe the case was built on information they consider improperly obtained, including materials from a phone connected to Jen Abel. They're also dealing with other related legal matters still in motion. There's an ongoing legal dispute involving Stephanie Jones, as well as additional litigation that has grown out of this broader conflict. Some complaints have even been amended to bring new parties into the mix long after the initial filings. All of that creates leverage on multiple sides. Even if certain claims were dismissed, an appeal could keep parts of the fight alive. There are also claims involving alleged misuse of legal process, disputes over how information was obtained, and concerns about protective orders, particularly around the public release of deposition materials and personal information. And then there's one more layer: potential new claims. As discovery continues and more details emerge, either side could identify additional legal grounds to pursue. So while a settlement conference aims to bring closure, this particular situation is surrounded by moving parts and unresolved tensions. With so much at stake, and with each side believing strongly in its own position, it's easy to see why reaching a simple agreement might be far more complicated than it sounds. There are also other legal angles still hovering in the background. Issues tied to the protective order, for example, could potentially turn into entirely new claims. The same goes for the alleged abusive process connected to the Van Zandt matter. Those would stand apart from earlier accusations involving defamation, unjust enrichment, or attempted extortion that were previously discussed. In other words, even beyond the current lawsuit, there are multiple layers of legal risk and opportunity for both sides. From Blake's perspective, her primary leverage is her lawsuit, one she clearly believes is grounded in fact. When someone is convinced they're right, it can be incredibly difficult to find middle ground. And when both sides feel that strongly, settlement becomes even more complicated. Anyone who's ever been caught in a legal dispute knows how exhausting it can be. There's emotional strain, financial pressure, and the constant stress of uncertainty. Some people settle simply to move on, even if no wrongdoing is admitted and no money changes hands. It's not always about winning, it's about ending the fight. But there's also a downside to settling too often. If a pattern develops where someone always compromises to avoid conflict, others may start to assume they'll do it again. And that can shift the balance of power. Fighting all the way through a case sends a different message. It says, if you come after me, I won't back down. There's a certain strength in that stance, especially when reputations and careers are on the line. From what we can see, this case isn't just about legal arguments, it's about long-term credibility and survival in a very competitive industry. For Justin Baldoni, the stakes appear especially high. Yes, he has financial backing and resources. Yes, he's built a successful career. But he doesn't have the same level of wealth or star power as Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. And beyond the legal battle itself, he's reportedly fighting to preserve future career opportunities. There have already been major life changes. He's put his California home on the market and relocated to Tennessee. The future of his company, Wayfarer Studios, remains uncertain. Based on deposition details and industry chatter, some opportunities that once seemed secure have reportedly slowed down or disappeared. A major factor in that appears to be the loss of representation with WME, which previously helped facilitate many of his professional deals. While representation isn't strictly necessary in Hollywood, having a powerful agency can open doors and provide strong advocacy behind the scenes. Without that support, rebuilding momentum can be challenging. And for someone in Justin's position, this case may feel like a defining moment, not just for his company, but for his personal future in the industry. On the other side, Blake may feel she's also fighting for her career and reputation. High-profile legal disputes have a way of shaping public perception long before a courtroom decision is ever made. Even a legal victory doesn't always translate into a full recovery in the court of public opinion. Once narratives take hold, they can be hard to shift. This situation has drawn intense public attention, and with that attention comes scrutiny. Conversations about reputation, workplace behavior, and industry dynamics have all surfaced in the process. Some critics point to earlier controversies and long-standing rumors about behind-the-scenes conflicts, while supporters argue that public narratives don't always reflect the full truth. In today's media environment, both things can exist at once: strong opinions and incomplete information. What's clear is that both sides have a great deal at stake, not just legally, but personally and professionally. Careers, reputations, and future opportunities all hang in the balance. And when the consequences are that significant, neither side is likely to walk away easily. As the conversation around this case continues, strong opinions are being shared from every direction. Some supporters of Blake Lively argue that criticism toward her reflects deeper gender bias within the industry. Others see it differently, suggesting that accusations, no matter who they're directed at, can carry serious consequences for everyone involved. It's a complicated conversation, and one that clearly touches on broader themes like fairness, accountability, and public perception. What's becoming increasingly clear is that even a settlement may not truly resolve the deeper conflict. In high-profile cases like this, legal outcomes and public opinion often move on separate tracks. A courtroom decision might settle the legal dispute, but the narrative outside the courtroom can continue to evolve. Some observers believe that, regardless of the legal result, each side will continue to tell its own story. Public statements, interviews, and media coverage can shape how events are remembered long after any legal agreement is signed. We've seen similar situations before, most notably with Amber Heard, where even after court proceedings concluded, the debate in the public sphere continued for years. There's also a broader cultural conversation happening here. Many viewers are reflecting on how celebrity disputes intersect with larger social movements, and how public figures can sometimes become symbolic of issues much bigger than themselves. For some, this case represents a conversation about accountability. For others, it highlights concerns about reputation, media influence, and fairness in the public eye. Meanwhile, for Justin Baldoni and those connected to his company, the stakes appear deeply personal and professional. While there may be financial backing and industry connections involved, not everyone tied to the case has the same level of wealth or public visibility. Several individuals connected to the situation are simply professionals whose careers and reputations have been affected by the ongoing dispute. For them, the outcome isn't just about legal victory, it's about moving forward with their lives and work. There's also the question of principle. At a certain point, some people decide they'd rather see a case through to the end than settle quietly. Whether that's to clear their name, defend their reputation, or simply make a stand, the chase to continue can be driven by more than money alone. From what's being discussed, it seems at least one side believes strongly in taking that path. So where does that leave things? For now, the settlement conference offers an opportunity, but not a guarantee of resolution. Both sides have the right to defend their positions and pursue the outcome they believe is fair. If no agreement is reached, the case could continue through further motions, potential appeals, or even trial. What happened in court today, at least this morning, gives us a clearer picture of how settlement conferences work and what might come next. As developments unfold, we'll have a better sense of whether this dispute moves toward resolution or heads deeper into the legal process. For now, that's the latest update and a closer look at what today's proceedings mean. More information will likely emerge as the day continues and as decisions are made behind closed doors.